This is the second time that we've incorporated AI into the competition, and we're taking it a little bit further than we have in previous competitions. So just going to get some folks in from the wait room. All right, there we go. All right, so a little bit, right? So obviously nothing new here. AI is changing the landscape of many crimes, including social engineering. And initially, you know, as with most, I guess, cyber crimes, right? There's always been automation and things like that. But there were parts of it that still required time, effort, and strong writing skills. And so you may have had to manually craft emails or research target or prepare scripts. And what AI has essentially done is really dramatically reduce that effort. So with modern Gen AI tools, generative AI tools, attackers can produce phishing emails, scripts, fake profiles, and even audio or video content in seconds. And this means attackers can scale operations a lot more efficiently. However, it is important to remember that AI does not replace the core psychological aspects of social engineering, right? So the human element, trust, persuasion, manipulation, everything you heard Jake and Juan He talk about earlier, that still remains central. So what AI does is it acts as a force multiplier. So it makes social engineering attacks faster, more convincing, and easier to execute. Okay. So voice-based social engineering attacks, often called vishing, can also benefit from AI tools. This is going to be a core component of this year's competition, and we'll talk about that in a bit, right? So yeah, it can be used to help you generate your structured conversation scripts tailored to specific organizations or industries. These scripts can include likely pushbacks and possible responses, right? So for example, an attacker might ask AI to generate a script for someone pretending to be an IT support technician, contacting, in this case, a pharmacy employee. So AI can also help attackers translate scripts into different languages, which is not something we are doing for this competition, but it can help adjust the tone also depending on the role they're pretending to play, which may very well be a part of this competition. So this allows, attackers to conduct voice-based attacks with less preparation while sounding structured and confident. Right. So again, this is going to be a component of the competition. So the more concerning developments in AI-enabled social engineering is deepfakes and also synthetic media. So we do have technology that can replicate a person's voice, right, or visual appearance using AI models trained on existing recordings. And I'm sure many of you have heard lots of stories around this, right? The ransom demanded for kidnapping of loved ones or impersonating executives, where attackers generate audio that sounds like a CEO that instructs employees to either transfer funds or release sensitive information. So this stuff has been happening. So, so while, this is relatively rare compared to phishing, right? Phishing in general, but the technology is improving quickly. And what makes deepfakes very, very powerful is that people tend to trust familiar voices, right? And so when an attacker can mimic those signals, it increases the perceived authenticity of the request. Okay. So what we are interested in looking at, you all do, is see how can you use AI to optimize persuasive communication. So, can you engage with the AI tool to refine messages so they sound more urgent or more authoritative or more helpful, depending on the scenario in question? What about changes to certain language or wording? Going back to Jake's discussion of jargon, or maybe internal language or lingo that is used, to make the whole conversation seem more believable or natural. And the idea is these kinds of tools help attackers test and refine persuasive strategies. So you might, for instance, generate several different versions of a script and choose the one to your liking. You can have iterative revisions, right, to your tool by interacting. It's like, no, I don't like this, fix this, right? So what kind of prompts are you going to give it? And this type of rapid iteration is going to significantly improve the effectiveness of social engineering campaigns. Now, despite all these cool capabilities, AI does have some limitations. So sometimes we know about these things called hallucinations, right? So they might just give you things that don't make any sense, or they might produce inaccurate information, or just generate details that don't align with reality. If an attacker, and in this situation, you all who are participating, rely too heavily on these things without verifying, these inconsistencies might actually expose you, right? Expose the attack. So, and remember that AI also struggles in many ways with real-time human interaction and improvisation. So while it can help you prepare, human attackers are still going to, remain a key part when it comes to executing the attack and adapting. And we want to see those similar types of things, right? So if you are using AI for this competition, are you checking for inaccuracies? Are you checking for, does this, make sense? Is it believable? Are you going to ensure that you are using this as a tool as opposed to using it to do the entire campaign? All right. We want to see you engage critically, like use that critical thinking when you're interacting with a tool. And we'll talk more about this. This is actually on the competition website in the FAQs, but we're going to talk about it a little bit more. So human psychology does still, matter, right? So remember, this is a social engineering competition. This is not an AI competition. So we are interested in looking at how are you all using AI to enhance social engineering. Okay, so it's very, very important that you understand that, right? We're not interested in, it's like, oh, the cool things you did with the tool. We're interested in all the cool things you did with the tool to make your social engineering campaigns better. So remember that it can generate content, automate tasks, and scale operations. And I'm going to pause here and talk about last year's competition where the only tool that was allowed to be used was text-based, and we decided to run with ChatGPT. Students, and of course, students are going to do this, we know this, but they inputted all of our instructions into ChatGPT. They inputted all the URLs, that we had for the competition infrastructure, and they just told it generate stuff. And then they took, not everybody, but there were a good number of teams that just took the first output and just ran with it. And that's fine, but they didn't do very well. Okay. So again, how are you taking that output? Things that we're going to be interested in looking at is, again, how did you verify things? Why are you confident in the output that you have presented to us? Right. So these are the kinds of things that we are interested in looking at. So understanding how these techniques work is definitely going to help individuals, especially you all, as you enter the workforce, or if you choose to have this as a career, right? Understanding how to use this responsibly and in a meaningful way, in an effective way. And this is at the heart of our competition. We have been talking about this at every single information session, and I'm going to emphasize this again, right? So what is ethics? So ethics serves as a foundational element in understanding what society considers acceptable and unacceptable behavior. So it's not only about following rules, but also aligning our actions with values such as fairness, respect, integrity, right? In the context of social engineering, ethical principles are crucial. So we are often in situations that are going to involve influencing behavior or accessing private information, and these actions bring significant responsibility. All right. So ethics guide us to respect individual autonomy, avoid harm, consider the broader impact of our actions in society, and the way that, this is also another part of the competition, right? So you're learning about social engineering. You're going to learn about how AI is used to enhance social engineering, but at each step of the way, there's also an ethical component, right? So when you are targeting this pharmacy and its employees, how are you going to be treating them? Right. And this is also, that's part of that learning experience. If you choose to do penetration testing, and within that scope, social engineering, that involves deception, that involves persuasion, that involves making sometimes people look bad, unfortunately. So, what is the ethical way to go about doing this? And that's what we are interested in looking at, right? So, it's going to help you, ethics is going to help you navigate this complex real world scenario, right? Whether you're assessing a specific technique or you're, for gathering information or deciding on an approach to influence someone's behavior, ethical considerations provide a framework that are going to help you evaluate the implications of your actions, okay? So you can imagine, right? Consequences for victims of social engineering can be significant. They may feel betrayed. They may experience a loss of trust or suffer emotional or financial harm. So the ripple effect can extend beyond individuals to impact organizational trust and morale, right? So if you're doing a penetration test and you're targeting the employees at this pharmacy, how are you going to then report your findings in such a way that hopefully, have ethics at its core? Okay. So the ethical implications are profound, not just for the victims, but also for the social engineers, right? So if you do something bad, you're damaging your own professional credibility. And you may face legal ramifications or sanctions if your actions are viewed as harmful or exploitative. So, in the broader sense, engaging in manipulative or deceptive practices can erode trust that is essential in professional and personal relationships. So, you really need to prioritize ethical considerations in all interactions, right? And it's easy to go into those gray areas because of this manipulation. So you are influencing someone's decisions, often subtly, right, by appealing to emotions or psychological triggers. So again, these raise ethical concerns. So, what are you doing, right? Is it manipulation versus deception? And you're exploiting psychological vulnerabilities, and that could range from subtle persuasion to overt control over someone's choices. So, when you think about this, just be very, very careful. This is also a key component of how we are going to be assessing you, right? So are you, for instance, one big no-no is the use of threats, right? Now, cyber criminals aren't bound by any rules, of course, but you, as ethical social engineers, are, right? So how are you, yes, you can create a sense of urgency without having the threat component in it, right? So just again, You should be cautious and deliberate, considering, whether the intended benefits of what you're doing outweigh the potential harm or discomfort that you're causing individuals or groups. Okay. So, there's there's always things to consider given what's out there, right? In this day and age, we're even, I think, more vulnerable to social engineering than ever before because of constant connectivity, information overload, new technological capabilities, right? And so you do have social media platforms like LinkedIn and Facebook. And one of the things also that I would recommend you go look is the annual report that is put out by the DEF CON social engineering community. And you can see, for instance, some of the places where people are getting information from, right? LinkedIn is almost always up there, but also Instagram, TikTok, things like that. So it's just easy to get information, a lot of information about people, about employees, about organizations, right? So this does raise ethical concerns around privacy and consent. So this is publicly available information, but is it okay to use it for manipulative purposes, right? And then we have, again, you are using AI for this competition. So again, when you're creating highly realistic audios or videos or content that's going to deceive your target, think again, it's harder now than for the target to distinguish truth from manipulation. So again, ethical implications of using technologies like this, you have to think about the harm and damaged reputations, right? So you need to consider the gravity of these consequences, and again, follow ethical standards, right? So please, please, please use this information responsibly, not just for this competition, but also later. And we're going to talk about that as well. There's also this idea of informed consent versus deception. So a lot of times when you're doing these kinds of engagements, the employees don't know what's going on, right? The person who hired you to do the engagement does, but employees do not. So because you are going to use elements of surprise or deception, right, without, in this case, the employee's consent. So you are, in a way, this does raise ethical concerns about the rights of individuals to make informed decisions about their interactions. So, one might argue that this deception can be justified if it serves a greater good, right? So it's enhancing security awareness, or it's preparing employees for real cyber threats. And that's wonderful. It's a utilitarian perspective that looks at short-term deception that may be acceptable if it is going to lead to greater overall benefits. But it might end up compromising trust that an employee has in a workplace environment. Individuals may feel betrayed once they learn about the deception, even if it was intended for their benefit. So again, erosion of trust can be harmful within organizations, and trust might be critical for collaboration, for morale. So, you have to navigate these dilemmas again while balancing security needs with ethical considerations. So, just some other, and I'm putting these things out there because the third day of the competition, and we'll talk about this, is client debriefs. So you're going to have to report your findings. How are you going to do that in, yes, a professional way while you complete, do like provide the most relevant information, but also in an ethical way. Okay, so just keep that in your mind as you progress through the competition. So when practicing social engineering, right, it's you, the social engineer, that has the power advantage over the targets, because You know more about the individuals that you're trying to influence, and you have specific goals that you want to accomplish, and you have specific insights into psychological techniques that the average person may not even think about. So so this power disparity does bring a high degree of responsibility. And so when you don't want to misuse that power, right? So responsible social engineers should acknowledge their influence and take care to use their techniques in ways that respect the autonomy and dignity of those they interact with. Okay, so again, when you are, let's say, on call with the employees, treat them with respect and dignity, right? So, practice prioritizing respect for the individuals and the organizations, and realizing again that if you misuse that power imbalance, it can lead to both immediate and long-lasting negative effects, one of which we talked about, which was trust erosion, right? And low morale, for instance. So ethics of data collection, we talked about, the fact that information is available. That's one of the reasons that we've created a sandbox for you all, a virtual sandbox, right? So that you stay within the confines of what we're providing you and don't go out to other actual platforms and do things. Okay. So, just because data is available online, okay, doesn't mean you have to use it without consideration, right? So in public social media profiles, these can be viewed by anyone, which is fine, but using that information then to manipulate or deceive someone crosses the line, right? Especially if it's going to violate privacy expectations. So we have said over the years, please do not, input competition data into AI tools, but we know it's happening. And we're not going to sit here and police that, right? But again, whatever you generate in this competition, however you collect it, which is why we have to make sure that everything that we do is a simulation, right? So you're not going to be able to take the identities of real people, things along those lines. So you can go look at stuff, but again, do not take that and make that part of this competition. Okay. So whatever it is that you're doing, please have clear boundaries around data collection, and be very careful and delineate between this simulated environment and what you are pulling in from the outside. Okay, so please be careful about that. Psychological impacts, right? So these are going to be employees at a pharmacy. And yes, it's simulated, but they're already working in a very high stress environment, right? So when you are approaching them, let's say during a phone call, they have 20 billion other things going on, right? And you are going to be adding a sense of urgency or authority or whatever it is that you plan to use. So remember that, yes, this may add to that stress or anxiety, especially, if they feel like they are going to be judged for their job. So if you are doing an audit and you use that sort of, attack vector, be again mindful of, you can certainly do that as a pen tester, you're allowed to, but then think also around the sort of ethical considerations, right? What kind of stress or pressures does this put on the employee? How much of that do you want to do? Where do you draw the line? And not only can this again lead to that trust erosion and low morale, it might end up resulting in long-term anxiety around workplace interactions, right? So you're trying to recognize these impacts and also to minimize them as much as possible. And so, think about how you're going to structure your campaigns with this in mind. So a responsible approach would allow the organization to build a resilient workforce without compromising the employee's well-being. Okay, so again, I'm saying this because yes, it's not a main part of the competition, but we are looking for campaigns that do address these other sort of peripheral matters, right? It's about social engineering. There's an AI component, but there's also a professional and ethical component as well. So are you reflecting that in your practices? So empathy is also very, very important. And putting yourself in the shoes of your targets. Better understanding this does help understand the emotional impact of your actions, right? So when you're conducting your campaigns, try to have an empathetic approach. And this is going to help help you understand with that mindset how to be more respectful and considerate, right? When designing your campaigns and then implementing them. So can you create that environment where employees again feel valued and respected? And you're more likely, if you follow this approach, to be hired again, right? So just sort of keep that in mind as well. Be mindful of cultural sensitivity. Also, we do have global workforces. So again, thinking very carefully about people coming from different parts of the world, right? Or is there a certain kind of hierarchy within the pharmacy environment, right? So it could be think of culture in multiple ways. It's what is the workplace culture like? Is there a hierarchy in place? Sometimes a workplace culture, or if you question authority figures, that's actually discouraged. You may not want to do that. So, understanding and this is where your OSINT will help you, is understanding, what the target is like, how do they work, what do they believe in, what is their mission, what is their values, right? All those types of things, which will be available, right? If you do the right kind of OSINT, you will figure that out. So being culturally aware is going to help you in your campaigns. Okay. Um, Obviously, best practices, right? You want to have transparency and honesty. If you have this within the organization, you're creating an open environment where employees can report suspicious activity without fear of retaliation. This particular one is going to help you when you have your client debriefs, right? So one of the things you're going to have to share your findings, but you're also going to have to make recommendations. So how would you make recommendations with these concepts in mind? So can you make it a safe place where employees can, for instance, report suspicious activity? Is it okay to do that? As an organization, maybe, they encourage employees to report phishing attempts without penalty, even if they fell for it, right? Which shows a commitment to both security and ethical conduct, training and awareness. So this is going to be another one that you will be asked to talk about based on the specific experience that you've had. So let's say you do a campaign, one of the recommendations, for instance, is going to be how do you train employees in the world of AI threats, right? And so having as opposed to having generic responses, and again, this is a human behavior focused competition. So saying that you should use an AI detection tool is great, but that's not about training the human, right? So how are you going to make recommendations about training the human to combat AI threats? And that's what we're interested in. So how can you again do so in a manner that is going to again be ethical and professional, right? And then establishing guidelines about acceptable and unacceptable behavior. So these guidelines, would you want to make recommendations around that, right? So again, Like I said, we know our competition information is being fed into AI tools, but one of the one of the things, of course, we don't want employees to do is do the same, right? So don't enter sensitive information to AI, obviously, is one of those things. But what else could it be? Right. So, what would be those sort of best practices in cybersecurity in the world of AI, in the world of social engineering? And this is where you, as a social engineer, have to make recommendations that make sense with these components in mind. Transparency and feedback. This is going to be day 3. You're going to have debriefings with your clients. So, how are you going to provide constructive feedback that makes your client want to trust you and wants to listen to you, and take the recommendations that you're providing into consideration, right? So it's how are you going to sell the work that you have done and your recommendations to us, right? So some of the typical recommendations that we've seen, right? Review and update your guidelines, your policies, your ethical guidelines. What kind of framework would you put into place so that employees and their supervisors might provide feedback? How are you going to incorporate that? What would be your recommendations for that evolving, right? The AI piece, how do you foster that evolving, ethically aware security culture? So this is also going to be, like I said, a key component of the competition is how are you presenting this to the client on the 3rd day of the competition? Now, there might be times when there are unintended consequences. Okay. So you've planned everything in your campaign and you're ready to go, and then something happens, right? So maybe an employee said something or did something that was out of scope. What are you going to do? How are you going to handle the situation? Do you have a game plan? How are you going to ensure that you, as a social engineer, avoid this ethical drift, right? Maybe you do something and you get away with it the first time and you knew you weren't supposed to do that. And they're like, well, it was okay this time because either you didn't get caught or the employee, right? Like it was small, and then you start drifting more and more away from ethics because you feel like you can do it again and again. So, really, really think about all possibilities, not just completing the objectives of the competition. Obviously, we want you to do that, but thinking about short-term, long-term impacts, how you're going to present this in a transparent and ethical manner, in a professional manner, and making sure that you, as a social engineer, remain ethical to the core and don't engage in the ethical drift.